Welcome back to Raising the Bar, a DWA production hosted by the ladies of the 2022 leadership class. Whether you've joined us for the first 3 episodes or you're new to the podcast, today we have a special guest in Terry Bentley Hill, a criminal defense attorney in Dallas, who will be speaking to a passion point of hers: maintaining perspective, fostering resilience, and building community in law school.
Hello, my name is Maya Madden. Today we will be hosting the 4th episode of On the Record, Stories and Lessons from Women in Law. Our guest speaker is Terry Bentley Hill. She is a criminal defense attorney in Dallas. She has built a robust defense practice representing clients who have mental health issues or substance use disorders that result in criminal charges. Her advocacy often results in dismissals or no bills for her clients. Bentley Hill is equally passionate about attorney wellness. She is the chair of the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program for the State Bar of Texas and was the chair of the Dallas Bar Association Peer Assistance Committee for 4 years. Earning recognition for her efforts, Bentley Hill was awarded the 2021 Terry Lee Grantham Memorial Award by the Texas Bar Foundation, and in 2011, a presidential citation from the State Bar of Texas. Bentley Hill is a prolific speaker and writer who has made hundreds of presentations across the country. She earned a Bachelor of Journalism degree from the University of Texas in Austin and a JD from what is now Texas A&M University School of Law. We are so excited to speak with her today about mental health, maintaining perspective, building community, and fostering resilience in law school. Ms. Bentley Hill, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to just briefly introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. You've said everything that I need to introduce myself about. I mean, you are exactly right. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Dallas, and I have many clients who experience mental health issues and substance use disorders. And it's my belief that people who are ill do not belong in jail or prison, and that we need to progress as far as our thinking on the criminal justice system, which I think the Titanic is moving just a little bit. And I think that we are getting better results. I've had many clients who have been part of a mental health division in the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. And when you address the core issue, then the rest of the issues solve themselves. And many of my clients have been very successful going through the mental health division and going through treatment and then getting on with their life. Now, the problem with mental health issues and substance use disorders is this. With substance use disorders, oftentimes people are in denial. And with mental health issues, oftentimes you don't know you have a mental health issue until you don't. And the only person in the state of Texas at times who can treat their substance use disorder or their mental health issue is sick, and they can't make proper decisions for themselves. So that's the frustrating part about it. And then oftentimes the police get involved. And when the police get involved, oftentimes the client will go to the Dallas County Jail, which happens to be the second largest mental health facility in the state of Texas behind Harris County Jail. So it's a broken system that we're trying to fix as best we can.
Thank you so much for that. It's really important population that you work with. The work that you're doing is really important and so necessary. So what are common themes with individuals who struggle with mental health concerns, and what have you seen in your profession or personal spheres?
Common themes are people with mental health conditions, specifically we'll stick with anxiety and depression, because anxiety is the number one mental health issue that we have in our country right now, and certainly followed by depression. There is a language that people speak, an anxiety language and a depression language, but most of us don't know how to speak that language. And so we need to learn how to speak the language of depression. So when we spot it, we can step in and help the person who is struggling. In fact, I started a foundation called Stop Minding Your Own Business. after I met a gentleman who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge when he was 17 years old. And he told me his story, which I'll be glad to share with you all, but he told me his story. And after he told me his story, I thought, oh my gosh, we have got to stop minding our own business, and we need to step out of our comfort zone and reach out to people who are struggling and may not even know what's wrong. They can't verbalize what's wrong, but they are showing their issues either through words like, everybody would be better off without me, I'm a burden to my family, the black and white thinking, which has a lot to do with lawyers, and I know we're going to segue into that, but the black and white thinking, the perfectionism, the catastrophic thinking. So there are words that go along with that thinking type. And then there are behaviors, especially with someone with depression. Oftentimes they isolate. They don't want to answer the phone. They oftentimes stop communicating with people. They medicate, and that's where the substance use comes in. Oftentimes when someone is struggling with maybe bipolar disorder or depression, they will oftentimes, and anxiety, they will use medication, drugs, or alcohol to medicate those issues. But really, the core might be a mental health condition.
And you kind of touched on your organization that you had started. Can you speak a little bit more about what the mission statement is and how you want to involve the community?
Stop Minding Your Own Business is an initiative to encourage all of us to step out of our comfort zone and to reach out to people when we spot the issues, whether they be substance use issues or mental health issues. And the reason why is because it's very personal to me. I was married to an elected district attorney, and in 1995, after years of the toll that job took on him and the way he dealt with the struggles with being a prosecutor and trying multiple death penalty cases, he medicated with alcohol. And when we got married, he had a substance use disorder called alcoholism. But I didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't know what that was. I didn't know how to react to it. I didn't know how to respond to it. And so we lived for 11 years in the shadows of secrecy, because many people, especially elected officials, are afraid to raise their hand and say, hey, I need help, because they're afraid they'll lose their job. And a lot of lawyers will not raise their hand and say help because they feel like it will affect their career. And so they live in the shadows of secrecy, and our secrets keep us sick. And for my husband, he spoke the language of depression all through our marriage, but because I didn't speak it, and I didn't understand what it was, his illness is progressive, and so it continued to get worse. And so after certain events occurred in his life, on April the 9th, 1995, he took his life in our home while our 4 daughters were sleeping. And because he was a public official, it was all over the news.
Right.
The media went live from our front yard. It made the newspapers in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, everywhere. And so it was a big deal because his insides didn't match his outsides. And he had been prosecutor of the year for the State Bar of Texas 9 months before he died. He had been president of the Texas District and County Attorneys Association the year before he died. So people were just floored. They were stunned. How can this man function at such a high level, and yet his personal life was crumbling? And because I didn't know what to do with it, and because I didn't know what was going on, and that this was an illness, I just thought he was being a big jerk.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And not to be mean, but I just thought he was a big jerk. And he could stop this business anytime he wanted. I didn't realize what I was dealing with. But because of his position, I kept it a secret. And I didn't tell anyone either. And that will go into my conversation with you about what we can do for ourselves and what we can encourage other people to do. And that is certainly to step out of the shadows and to say, I need help. in a safe and comforting way. And we can get into that in a minute. But I had 4 little girls at the time of his death. And 9 years after he died, my youngest daughter was 14 years old, and she also took her life. And so through that incredible devastation, I knew there had to be purpose for that suffering. And I got so involved in learning as much as I could about mental health and how we can help others. And I began emceeing a lot of events. I talk all the time, as you mentioned in the intro. I speak about this issue all the time. So I was at an event and I met this gentleman by the name of Kevin Hines. And Kevin Hines was 17 years old and he had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. All he knew was that he was miserable. He had become, he thought, a burden to his family. He thought everybody would be better off without him. See, he was already thinking, he had that cognitive distortion that it goes along with depression, thinking errors. And he didn't know how to overcome those thinking errors. So what he thought was, I'm just gonna take my life and I'm gonna jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he told me, and as a mother who lost a child to suicide, I was like, Kevin, thank God you survived, but because he did, he jumped off the bridge. And I said, what were you thinking? And he said something I'll never forget. He said, Terry, oftentimes when a person decides to die by suicide, they'll make a pact with themselves. If this happens today, I won't die today. May die tomorrow, but I won't die today. And the pact that he made with himself that day is if one person asks him, are you okay? He won't jump. And he told me about asking his father to take him to the city bus because he was going to catch the city bus to the bridge. So the entire way with his father to the city bus, he was crying because he thought, this is the last time I'm going to see my dad.
Right.
And he hugged his dad for the last time, and his father may have been exhausted. Maybe he was used to Kevin crying all the time. I don't know. I haven't spoken to his father, but he didn't ask him, Kevin, are you okay? What's wrong? Kevin goes to the city bus. He said he gets on the bus. It's a 10-minute ride to the bridge, and there was one seat on that bus, and it was at the very back. And so here he is, 17 years old, sobbing, bawling his head off, crying, going back to the very back, and he sits down, and for 10 minutes he sobbed, thinking, these are my last few minutes on this earth. Not one person on that bus said, son, are you okay? And he gets to the bridge, and he's standing there looking over the rail, and he said there was a woman who started walking towards him. He said, I'll never forget her as long as I live. She had black hair and these gigantic Chanel sunglasses on, and he thought, she sees me crying, she's going to ask me, are you okay? Because people oftentimes sadly jump off that Golden Gate Bridge when they want to die.
Right.
And she didn't ask him, are you okay? She handed him a camera and said, will you take my picture? And he went, okay. So he took the camera, took her picture, handed it back, and he jumped.
Wow.
But the thing that he said that I always tell teenagers when I'm talking to them, I tell anybody when I'm talking to them, the minute he jumped, he regretted it. Please don't let me die. I don't want to die. And he said the saddest thing in the 4 seconds it took him to hit that water was that he thought he was going to die and his family would never know that he wanted to live. And it just, I was just stunned when he told me that story. And that's when I thought, we have got to stop minding our own business.
Right.
We can all say, are you okay? That is not hard. And so even today, if I just pass someone on the street, or I pass someone in the courthouse, or a total stranger in the airport, if I see them, if they're crying, I'll always remember what Kevin said. If one person had asked him if he were okay, he would not have jumped. So I will always stop and say, are you okay? And people sometimes will look at me like I'm crazy.
Right.
And some people will be especially in the courthouse, it's almost like an act of kindness. They can't believe that I'm even stopping and acknowledging them.
Right.
And that's the point of asking the question, because when someone is in distress, oftentimes they just need someone to recognize that. to empathize with them. And it validates their feelings. And once your feelings are validated, then they're manageable. And that goes along with law students and with lawyers and with judges and with the entire population. You want to be validated. You want your feelings to be acknowledged. And in this country, we're often told, mind your own business.
Right.
Don't tell me how to raise my kids. Don't tell me when to mow my grass. Don't tell me when to wear a mask. Don't tell me when not to wear a mask. I mean, just mind your own business. But in this case, we have to stop minding our own business because it can save a life. And I know it does because I've experienced it by asking the question. And the question doesn't just stop when someone's in truly a depressive crisis or a suicidal crisis, and they're speaking the language that you never ignore. If someone says, I might as well just die, you never ignore those comments. Those aren't throwaway comments. Those are comments from a person who is in incredible pain. And so you can ask the question, are you okay? And then you follow up with, are you thinking of hurting yourself? And then you listen. Because oftentimes we want to talk them out of it and, give them hope and all of it. They just need to talk. And so we need to listen to what they're saying. And then if they do say, life is too hard. I just cannot do this. I'm flunking law school. I might as well just end it all. Then you ask, do you have a plan? And you sit and you listen to them. And then you say, we can get you help. There's help for you. There's help for you as a person, and there's help for you as a law student. And you're not alone in feeling this way. So we can get you help. And at that point, there are things you can do, or you can call 911 when someone is seriously in crisis. And I always say it is better to call 911 or the mobile crisis unit, which, by the way, the new number is 988.
Yeah.
It's a mental health 911. It's called 988, and you'll be connected with someone who can help you in our area immediately. And so that is something you can do. And then the cops don't necessarily come. The mobile crisis team comes if there is an emergency, and they're not taken to jail to protect themselves. They may be taken to a hospital to be stabilized.
Right.
They won't be stuck in there and they won't slam the door and take, throw the keys away. You're in there to stabilize, and then you'll usually be released once you're stabilized. So that's why stop minding your own business is so important.
And it's really eye-opening. You talk about your own experiences. You're very open and vulnerable, and I think that especially for maybe the lawyer community, the female lawyer community, that's something that's not necessarily talked about or touched on, and it can be a really isolating experience. And Natalie did mention that she sought out community, and that's really what grounded her, brought her back in, and that's something that she could not have done without. And I think that when we are going through a crisis or a situation, and those experiences can make it feel as though no one is there. No one is asking you, hey, are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? The flip side of that coin is to create community, create accountability. And I think that's so important. Like you said, in this society, the climate, it's head down, mind your business. You have your AirPods in, it's to and from A to B, and you're not really opening yourself up to that human experience that is really an interesting connection between the two that I think a lot of people are missing out on.
It is so important.
Yeah.
In fact, studies show that the most effective way to recover from depression, because it's a medical condition, it is not a personality disorder, and it's not a character flaw, it is a medical condition, and studies show that the best way to treat depression is like a three-legged stool. Oftentimes it takes medication because our neurotransmitters are not working properly. We're not releasing the serotonin and the dopamine and sometimes our brains can't make it. And that's my situation. Full disclosure, I have experienced depression myself, especially after my former husband took his life, and certainly after my daughter. I mean, she died in 2004, and I feel like it happened yesterday. I mean, so it is something that I consciously have to deal with every day. So I understand depression. I know how it feels, and I share that with people because I have a physical reaction to depression. So I have to have medication. My brain can't make the chemicals that I need. Second of all is cognitive behavioral therapy. Therapy is so important because we have, since cognitive distortion is a result of depression, we have stinking thinking. Right. And so we have to have a professional help us through those thinking errors and retrain our brain. And it takes a professional. It's bigger than we are. Right. We don't know how to do that. Right. And then thirdly is exactly what you were talking about, and that's peer support. And that is having a community. And that's why the legal community has support groups called Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. And there's even a monthly mental health meeting for people who are either having mental health issues or in mental health depression remission, but nevertheless want to stay that way. Right. That support group is so important. And like you're talking about, there are groups, mentoring groups within the legal field. There are women mentors who are in a mentoring group specifically to mentor your young lawyers, because having someone, number one, who will say, I know exactly what you're going through. It is powerful because we have this terminal uniqueness where we think, I'm the only one going through this. Right. I'm the dumbest one in here. Or I'm too stupid to be a lawyer. And you have this terminal uniqueness where you think that every mistake you make, that's all everyone's concentrating on. And guess what? Nobody is concentrating on that but you. And that C that you make in law school, the first C you make in law school, or the first C you've ever made in your academic career, it devastates a lot of people, and that's all you can think about. And so that's why being able to talk about that in a safe environment where you don't feel judged or you don't feel competitive, where you feel understood and you feel the empathy, is so healing and so empowering, and helps you through those very stressful days of law school and practicing law. Because one of the things that we do not do very well as a profession is to prepare our law students for what it's like to practice law. And I think law students have an inkling because of the way the law school is structured. It's a very competitive environment. You're told that your grades may get you the best jobs, and if you come in third instead of first, I mean, it's just all this pressure. Yeah. Plus, we're wired. I think lawyers are wired a certain way. We're perfectionists, right? We're type A personalities. Yes. We are achievers. And so when we're not used to, say, being in the top third instead of in the top 5%, it really takes a toll on people's self-esteem. And it's just like even taking the bar. People, I want to score on the bar exam. Well, all you need is 1 point to pass, and then you're a lawyer. You're right. You don't have to be the best, and it takes a lot of pressure. However, I don't want to leave the impression that you don't have to prepare. Right. Because you may not be the smartest lawyer in the courtroom, but if you're the most prepared, then you're going to be the most successful. So it's not always the smartest lawyer in the courtroom that is the most successful. It's usually the most prepared. And so that is something you can get into a habit as a law student, just to be prepared. Right. But the mental health awareness has increased in so many ways that I think there are more opportunities for lawyers to seek that peer support. But you've got to seek it out.
And we've kind of touched on this, but have you experienced burnout, and what does that kind of look like? How do you manage it or prepare for burnout?
I personally, fortunately, have not experienced burnout for one reason, And that is because before I became a lawyer, I'm a later in life attorney.
Right.
And before I became an attorney, I did a lot of mental health therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I went to support groups. I learned about mindfulness. So I was aware of all of those tools in that toolbox. So I haven't gotten to the point where I have burned out. What happens oftentimes, especially with young lawyers, is that there's an expectation for achievement. And the environment they may be in, whether it's a big law, a medium-sized law firm, or if they're even solo practitioners, that there is an expectation of performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so that adds a tremendous amount of pressure. And so what happens is then we don't do what we need to do to take care of ourselves,
Right.
because we're working 14 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't want to say, no, that's not going to work for me,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody else in there is doing 14
Right.
hours a day. So it's all that inherent stress that's
Mm-hmm.
built into the profession. But one thing you can do is that you can learn the tools that are in the self-care toolbox, that you can train yourself to, number one, I think the most important thing is to accept yourself for exactly who you are. And you are perfect exactly the way you are. And you may have an idea of what your life, your career in the legal profession is, and yet it may not go that way.
Right.
But every disappointment, look at that as a gift, because you're learning something from that. And you're going to take something away from those disappointments or those losses in the courtroom or whatever, and you learn the experience. You learn the lesson and you throw the experience away. And so then you begin to build your own toolbox.
Right.
And you realize that when you go home at night, you shut that computer down, or you set that phone on focus, or you shut it down completely. But you do certain things that you can detach, because people, especially in today's world with the electronics, especially with the pandemic, where we've learned how to do everything on Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got all of these emails. We average about 120 emails that come into our inbox. And think about that. If you went to your mailbox 120 times a day, your neighbors would call the cops.
Right.
I mean, let's say something's wrong with that person. But because we're in the privacy of our own house,
Mm-hmm.
or our own office or wherever, we just keep working like
Right.
mad, and people will take whatever you'll give.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to draw boundaries. You have to say to clients, I'm not available after 5 o'clock,
Right.
or I'm not available on the weekends, or I'm going on vacation and I have to take care of myself. I'm not 100% available all the time. So I think that's the main thing, is just learning and owning the right to take care of yourself. And if it's not working for you where you are, then find some place that it will work, because there are places that are maybe more compatible with what you may need as a human being. And that's okay. And analyze that. We analyze everything else.
Yeah.
What do you need as a human being?
And just matching up those needs with what
Yes.
they're willing to give.
Exactly.
Because I know a lot of, law students, young attorneys, there's such a desire to please, desire to accomplish everything, to stand out, to make sure that you're meeting everyone's needs. And you're, like you said, available on the phone 24/7. You get an email, you respond right back. And it's kind of a cycle of just trying to keep yourself in that hyper awareness state. And I think that there are a lot of issues, even in law school, with people already burning out from that constant movement.
Well, there are statistics about attorney substance use,
Mm-hmm.
the toll it's taking on mental health. There were reports, studies.
Right.
And one of the studies was for law students, is that when a law student enters law school, this is all self-reporting too, by the way, so I think it's probably higher, but 8% of the law students say they might have a problem with alcohol. By the end of their 3L year, it's 28% have a problem with alcohol. So that screams all kinds of pressure and stress that people are experiencing in law school, and the burnout for sure. And then on top of that, then you've got to, oh my gosh, study for the stinking bar. And then, oh my gosh, then I go right into working. I mean, it's just like, take a deep breath. You're going to be okay. And you find people who will support you, because there are people who will support you.
Just segueing into our next topic, imposter syndrome can be an issue, especially for women in law school. Can you speak to these issues and how to be confident, particularly in male-dominated spaces?
That is such an important topic. And I am involved in an event at the Dallas Bar Association on Friday. It's called Inspiring Women. There are 6 panelists who are at the top of their legal game. They are federal judges, they are dean of a law school, they are managing partner of a law firm. I mean, they are top of their game. And they talk about what it was like and what it is like even to this day of feeling like an imposter. Like they're always having to prove something, that they're really not good enough. And yet they certainly are. And I think if you turn imposter syndrome into a positive, what I think it is it keeps a human being humble and willing to learn. And instead of a fault, turn it to be a positive, where, okay, your ego is not running wild. Because you're thinking, am I good enough? Well, of course you are. I mean, you look at the body of evidence. Of course you're good enough. Now, I think that, again, there is no doubt that there still is a gender discrepancy in the practice of law, but it's changing. Because women are, number one, graduating in bigger numbers from law school, and women have now gotten to the point where they are in leadership positions. And so that culture is changing. And so you all are coming along at a great time, because number one, they're willing to admit that they've experienced imposter syndrome, and they know how to encourage, especially the young female lawyers, about that. And I guarantee you, men feel the same way, but it just manifests differently. They just deal with it differently. But I think everyone feels that, and just know that it's a reality. It is there, and you are not the only one who thinks that way. I'll never forget the first time I was in a courtroom and I made a rookie mistake, and a judge let me know that I had made a rookie mistake. And I walked out of there thinking, I'm too stupid to be a lawyer. And how ridiculous was that? I just made a mistake. But I thought, I walked around the halls thinking, I don't belong here. I'm not good enough to be here. And that was just that stinking thinking that sometimes will kick right in when we're new and we're shaky. So just know that you are worthy and you are good at what you do, and just be who you are.
That's great advice, just particularly with, individuals going through law school, going through the law career. It is a lot about, feeling like you have to prove something all around. And I think that if we just kind of take a breath, take a step, and then try and figure out, why am I doing this? Really digging into the why and being focused on that, reorienting our thinking, having those tools is just so important.
And along with that, I think is so important. And I give the interns in our office this advice. You all have not, when you get out of law school, you don't know how to practice law.
They
don't teach you all how to practice law. So how are you supposed to know how to do something you weren't taught, right? Okay, so number one. So when these interns come in our office and we're talking about indictments, and we're talking about motions to suppress, and we're talking about things that they have no idea how to do, oftentimes they won't ask the question because they don't want to come across as looking dumb. And so my advice to every intern that comes into our office is ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
You will not look dumb. In fact, you will look smart by asking the questions.
Right.
Because nobody minds explaining what we're talking about and training you. That's the whole point of you being in the office, is to train and to learn how to be a lawyer, because you don't know how to be a lawyer. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
So never, ever, ever fear asking questions. You will be less served if you keep quiet because you're afraid that you'll look dumb by asking the question. No dumb questions. Always ask the questions.
Okay. And as individuals who are extremely grade conscious and may have a complicated relationship with grades, how can someone come to terms with not receiving the grades they want? How does this compare to falling short of one's goals?
It is hard when we set expectations for ourselves. And we have done really well all of our lives, especially academically. There are people in law school who haven't made less than a B.
Right.
And then to get, and then to realize, okay, I'm in here with peers who are obviously extremely intelligent, and they get that first C, and it's like an earthquake for them. And there are things that I know that I try to express to people who are crushed, whether they admit it or not. You know they are. And there's you feel shame. Well, why would you feel shame? I mean, there may have been just something on that exam, and I assume we had one exam. What about you all? Do you have one exam at the end of the semester?
Yeah,
exactly.
Pretty much.
We have one shot at it, right? And there may be something that, for whatever reason, just did not compute. It's as simple as that.
Right.
So it could affect your grade. It doesn't affect you as a human being, or it doesn't mean anything other than, for whatever reason, on that day that you took that exam, that there were people who clicked with that question maybe a little bit better than you. But it doesn't mean that you are less than. And to give yourself grace that it will be okay. And there are people who made C's all through law school who are the best lawyers. And oftentimes you'll hear that. It's that person who tries hard, but is that well-rounded person who might take care of themselves, or who might just be occupied at home or working part-time or whatever the case may be, but that it's okay.
Right.
You are perfect exactly the way you are, and you're not, that grade does not define you. It doesn't. And you let it go. You have to let it go.
And you talked about tools in your toolbox. What particular tools do people find that works for them when specifically looking at grades, goals, things like that?
Well, I think that practicing acceptance is huge. And what does that look like? Acceptance to me means that whatever is happening at this very moment is exactly what's supposed to be happening at this moment. There is a reason why things are happening, and it's really to benefit me in the long run. It depends on my perspective on that.
Sure.
And so I have to train my perspective, and that goes back to the C's or to the grades that aren't living up to expectation. It is accepting that what is happening is exactly what's supposed to be happening, and that it's going to work for my good in the long run. I'm going to learn something from this. And then it's how you look at it, that then you take that nugget and you start building on those acceptance blocks, and you get to where you need to go. And it may not be where you think you need to go.
Right.
And so that's all acceptance and perception. And we're powerless over what happens to us. We're powerless that there's a pandemic and you have to go online and go to law school online. I mean, I can't even imagine what that was like, or even undergraduate online. I cannot imagine what that was like. But we're powerless over it, so we have to adapt. But one of the things that we are not powerless over, and that is our perception. The way we look at things is a choice. And so you have two learn, you have to train your brain to look at it in a positive light. And it doesn't mean you don't feel your feelings, because you can feel disappointment. Right. You can feel sadness, or you can feel anger, or you can feel those feelings. They're valid. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is it doesn't define who you are, and you have to remember that, and you have to train your brain to believe that. And another thing that people can do is something I always thought was ridiculous, but it is affirmations. Mm-hmm. And studies have shown that if you tell yourself positive messages and not negative messages, then it can change the wiring in your brain and the way you look at things. For example, getting up in the morning and just saying, my best is good enough. I am good enough to be a lawyer. I'm good enough to be a law student. I am still in law school, even though I made 4 C's. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's the affirmations that can change the way you look at things. So, some people say 5 affirmations every morning to start their day. Mm-hmm. And that is something you can absolutely do. One of the things that has been very helpful, especially in very stressful moments in law school, is when you're under a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, your sympathetic system is activated. Right. So how do we deactivate the sympathetic system? And that is to breathe. Mm-hmm. And what you may need to do is just put your hand on your diaphragm and put the other hand on your heart, and you take 4 deep breaths and you hold it for 4 seconds, and then you release it for 4 seconds. And you do that 4 times, and what that does is that calms that firing brain, that brain that is just out of control. It brings that fight, flight, or freeze brain back down so you can think. Because what happens when you get under incredible stress, especially if you've grown up in chaos, especially if you've suffered trauma yourself, especially if you have an anxiety disorder, or you have a good reason to already have that wiring in your brain. As soon as something stressful happens, your brain can't go, oh, this is just a law school exam. Your brain goes, holy cow. Yeah. And it activates the amygdala. Mm-hmm. And so then you go into what they sometimes lovingly refer to as the lizard brain. And it shuts down the cognitive part of your brain. So it's really hard to think. And I sometimes I'll just it's like I have no idea what you just asked me. Right. Because I'm in absolute extreme anxiety. And so I have to breathe to bring my parasympathetic system to overcome the fear and the anxiety. And breathing is so powerful to do that. And even in the courtroom, you can step out and do that breathing. And even before you even ask a question of your witness, if you're going, I'm just freaking out here, take a deep breath, because getting that oxygen in is so powerful. Drinking lots and lots of water. There are over 16,000 lawyers in the state of Texas practicing law over the age of 65. So I've talked to some geriatric folks. Psychiatrists. Oh. And I know y'all are a long way from that, but the point being is that this geriatric psychiatrist said, water is vital, because what it does is it's like oxygen for our cells. That water. Think of a dehydrated orange, what that looks like. Well, that's what happens when we become dehydrated, is that our brain, it's not operating in the best form because it's dried out. You keep that water in your system, and it helps with sleep, and it helps with confusion, and it helps you think clearer. And so I never drank water. I always drank iced tea, which is a diuretic, Diet Coke. I drank everything because I didn't like drinking water. Now, I know when I'm dehydrated because I can't remember the name of the people on Friends. I can't. Now, she had short hair. I'll go through the charade. She had short hair. She was really popular. She's really pretty. Right. Until someone goes, "Are you Jennifer Aniston? Are you talking about Jennifer Aniston?" And I'm like, yeah. So I know that I'm thirsty. I'm dehydrated. So water is so important as well. Talk to trusted friends. So, because what happens is that monster in our brain grows if it stays in there all by itself. And so by talking about it, then it relieves the power of those gremlins in our brain just by verbalizing it. So verbalizing what's going on is real important. And one of the things I want you guys to pay attention to when you're looking at places to go to work. And I know I'll say, ask the partners who are interviewing you, what is your wellness procedure in your firm? I mean, do you have people you can process things with? And they're looking at me like, yeah, right. I'm going to ask these partners, what is your protocol? But it's very important because there are a lot of, the American Bar Association has really encouraged these law firms to establish a wellness protocol in their offices where you can decompress, where you can process, because once you process and you verbalize it, then it takes its power away. That takes that anxiety, takes the power of the anxiety away.
For individuals who are feeling overwhelmed in law school, what's the best advice that you have given or received?
One of the things that you can do if you're overwhelmed is there is a part of the state bar that is, and it's called the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. And there are staff members who are employed by the state bar but are separate from the state bar. In other words, it is not a disciplinary arm of the state bar, it is the helping arm of the state bar. It's called the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. You call that number, and 24/7 someone's going to answer that phone, and that someone is either going to be a lawyer with a degree in counseling, or it will be a counselor, or they will patch you into a counselor, no matter what, 24/7. And this is the good news and the bad news. We document the calls that come in. Now, you can call anonymously. I can call and just say, hey, I'm a law student. I am overwhelmed. I've got this pressure. I don't know if I can make it. I just don't know if I'm cut out for this. And so then they won't even ask you your name unless you want to give it to them. So it's 100% confidential. But as I said, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that 40% of our phone calls coming into the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program are from law students, which means law students are going, hey, I am not afraid to ask for help.
Right.
I'm not afraid to contact someone and talk about my issues. That is the best news, and way to go, you guys, because you're changing the culture. So we're thankful for that. But that's also the bad news, is that our law students are so stressed that they're having to call and ask for help.
Right.
But I'd rather them ask for help. What I'm thinking is we need more support in the law schools for you guys. And so you don't feel so alone. But if you do feel alone and you feel at the end of your rope, you can call the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, or you can go to their website, because there's a toolbox where there are tons of videos. There are tons of CLEs that are available to you all, materials, and there are all kinds of suggestions that can help you as a law student. If you go to TLAP helps.org, so it's TLAPhelps.org. So you can go to the website, and if you go, okay, this is helpful, but I need to talk to someone, then you call. And there are a lot of students who are already financially maxed out. There's a trust fund that is set up for lawyers, and if you don't have the money to go see a therapist, or if to even go to treatment or to get medication, you can get a scholarship where this trust will help you pay for that. So, because a lot of people just, I don't have the money, I can't do that.
Right.
But there is a scholarship and you can apply for that.
And just going along with that, in terms of resources, how would you suggest navigating questions about mental health on the bar, particularly the character and fitness portion?
I know. I don't even want to sit here and try to say I have the answer because it's a problem. It is a real problem. On the one hand, I'm sitting here saying, speak up, ask for help, and then you turn around and they're asking you questions that may feel like it could influence the success of your career, right?
Right.
So it's inconsistent and it doesn't make sense. We're trying to change that. That's all I can tell you, is that we're trying to change that. What would I do? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think that is a topic that needs to be really discussed more, because I have law students who ask me that all the time.
Right.
And I don't want to give the wrong advice. I don't want to make the wrong suggestions. I know what I would do, but I don't know what someone else should do.
Right.
So I'm sorry that it's that way. I can just say that. One of the things you can do is, if you've had treatment in the past, even if you've been hospitalized in the past, there's no shame in that. You know, you can handle it the way you need to handle it.
Right.
And then afterwards, then you can continue handling your mental health treatment in any way that you need to. I'm not saying one way or the other what to do. I'm just saying is, I know it's frustrating. I'm sorry. It was a terrible answer.
It's okay.
It is a tough one. I agree.
Area for growth.
Yeah, but you know what? One thing I would recommend, the person who might be able to answer this are the people at TLAP. And if there is a concern on how to fill that out and how to answer those questions, call TLAP first and talk to Erica Grigg, who is the director of the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. Ask her. That's my answer. It just took me a while to get there. Call the pros and ask them.
Okay. So, you know, sometimes it can be easy to lose sight of the bigger picture when you have immediate demands in a high stress environment. Can you elaborate on how to maintain your why or your perspective? For example, why do you continue the work despite difficulties, and how is this related to mental health?
I think it's good to take an inventory. You know, in the business world, businesses take inventory of their products all the time. And I think it's important to take a personal inventory and to say, okay, my goal is to be out of debt in 7 years. And this is the way I'm going to do that. But I think that it's important to assess truly what your goals are, and are they realistic, and how do you get there? And what I recommend is becoming part of groups where there is a mentoring factor, because not only are you going to get wise, sage advice, you're going to make networking contacts that may really benefit you in the future. And so I think that's crucial. I encourage law students to get involved with the bar associations, whether it's Tarrant County, whether it's Dallas County, because there are mentoring groups that are set up through the Dallas Bar Association, for specifically, I'm sure Tarrant County as well. And there's a transition to law group through the Dallas Bar Association. And I think what happens is you will be with experienced lawyers who have already been where you've been, and they can keep your expectations realistic, because oftentimes I think our expectations are unrealistic. So I think that being with older attorneys who are experienced and who are kind of grabbing you by the hand and saying, come on, let's go, I'll show you how to do this, really it helps you keep focused and keep your goals realistic.
And what is one thing that you wish you knew before law school, before entering into the legal field?
I wish I had known that there are really wonderful, supportive people. I think people have an idea that lawyers are hard ass and competitive and cutthroat. And I think that what I wish I had known is that there are so many kind, supportive, encouraging lawyers that it would have taken a lot of pressure off of me, that I wouldn't have felt like I had this performance anxiety where I had to be brilliant the minute I walked into a courtroom. That's what I wish I had known, that there are people who are pulling for you and not always trying to knock you off the pole. And there are those, don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of helpful, empathetic, supportive, wonderful people in the practice of law.
That's great to know. I think that particularly with the culture, let's just say in quotes, of the legal community is like what you said, that it's very cutthroat, it's very nasty, and it kind of can keep certain people out of the legal field for lack of, knowledge or accessibility to those spaces. And it can also prevent people from reaching out and really establishing that community.
Exactly.
You miss so much with your eyes shut.
Right. And you're going to bump into a lot of things with your eyes shut too.
Right. We have another question about being a lawyer. We wanted to ask, is it possible to be a happy lawyer? And what does being a happy lawyer entail?
It is absolutely possible to be a happy lawyer. I love that question. Yes, you can be a happy lawyer. Let me tell you why I'm happy being a lawyer. I went into the practice of law because I do believe that we are very blessed that we're in a position where we can really help people. And I think that we have an obligation of service. That's my perspective on practicing law, is being a service to people, especially in the criminal law. People don't come to me because they like me. Right. They come to me because they're in trouble. And I can't solve everybody's problem. I'm not the one who got them in jail. I am going to work as hard as I can to provide the best solution and the best outcome for my clients. Mm-hmm. And when I'm able to do that, and I'm able to sit down with a client and look them in the eye, and they'll say, I can't tell you how much I appreciate everything that you've done for me. It has changed my life. It has changed my family's life. That is so satisfying. And that makes me so happy. And I also would walk around and pinch myself at times because I couldn't believe I was a lawyer. Mm-hmm. Of all things, I'm a lawyer. That to me still held, I held that in a lot of respect and admiration. Whereas a lot of people in the community go, oh, you're a stinking lawyer. That's not the way I looked at it. I looked at it as, I'm so proud to be a lawyer. Now, what am I going to do with this very unique skill that I have? And that was to be of service to others. And it makes me very happy to be able to do that. And I love my colleagues. I love my lawyer groups. I belong to what's called Act 3. It's a group of women lawyers from all kind of diverse practices. And we just get together once a month and we support each other and we talk and we tell war stories. We say, oh my gosh, the judge chewed me out, whatever the case may be. But I love the people I have met while practicing law. It is family. Mm-hmm. And so that makes me very happy. Yes, you can be happy practicing law, but you're going to have to make choices to be happy. You really are. And, that's up to the individual. And sometimes it takes a long time to learn that, but you can be happy. I'm not saying you'll come out with all the answers. You won't. And you're gonna hit some roadblocks, and you're gonna be discouraged, and you're gonna get yelled at, and you're gonna be told things that you don't want to hear. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is how are you going to take that information and turn it into a positive? Because you always can. Learn the lesson and throw the experience away.
Well, I think that wraps it up for our questions. So I just wanted to thank you, Ms. Bentley Hill, for this episode of On the Record Stories and Lessons from Women in Law. We appreciate your time, your perspective, and your knowledge. And thank you for everyone listening to this episode, and stay tuned for more episodes on navigating law school and beyond. Hi, listeners. This is Maya, and I'm here with Natalie, and we're going over our episode with Terry Bentley Hill regarding mental health. So, as a reaction video, I'm just going to be chatting with Natalie regarding the contents of the episode, and she's going to add in her 2 cents as well as her own personal experiences. Hi, Natalie. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Maya. I was really glad that we had the opportunity to do this because I was really disappointed to miss Terry Bentley Hill, but I very much enjoyed listening to y'all's conversation and look forward to getting into it.
Great. So, just as a recap, what did you think about her personal story and what she had to say about mental health and community?
I think that her personal story is really gut-wrenching.
Mm-hmm.
I admire her immensely for what she built of her life and her career after those tragedies, because I think that those kind of events in people's lives can and do regularly destroy the people. They don't come back from that. So what she's done in response to that is really incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to agree with basically everything that she talked about in terms of mental health and in terms of community building, based on what I've experienced and based off of what I've seen around me in law school. I think that the points that she makes are super relevant, and I wish that more people would consider them.
And she talks about, talking the language of mental illness and having conversations in the same language. How important do you think that is to understanding mental illness or being able to engage with somebody who experiences, mental illness episodes or things of that nature? How important do you think it is for general public to educate themselves around the language of mental illness?
I think given the amount of mental illness that we now understand is prevalent in society, that I think it's critical for everyone to educate themselves on the way that those who have mental illness think and the way that they speak about themselves and that vocabulary she talked about. I think that connecting on that level of understanding the language is really important in getting through to people, because if you don't connect on the language level, often people will dismiss you because they don't think that you get what they're going through. You can be as well-meaning as you want, but someone will write you off as not really having a clue because you're just giving them a platitude.
Right. And I think it just goes back to really showing that you're interested in helping them, showing them that they matter, and furthermore, making yourself available on their terms, right? So you're speaking their language, you're being inclusive, and through those steps, do you think that the perspective for the individual who they're trying to reach out to, it would be beneficial to them, right? Beneficial to the conversation, beneficial to them feeling heard, understood. What do you think can be the impact of that on like a wider scale?
It's hard to speak exactly to that without an example to work with,
right.
But to speak generally, I do believe that familiarity with the language of mental illness is critical to connecting. And the reason that I believe that is because it gives you a broader base from which to communicate. Familiarity with the language of mental illness should also include the knowledge that you may not be able to change anything materially. You may not be able to fix it, but you can hear someone out and let them know that even though you don't understand exactly what's happening in their head, that you can imagine, or that you're sorry that they're going through a difficult time. Coming from a place of understanding that you might not get it is also really important.
Right. And there can be fundamental differences or, differences of perception. And I think that language is so important when you try and delve in and break down those misconceptions, because inaccurate language can be more harmful than it is helpful. You mentioned intentions, and I think particularly with individuals who try and disrupt some of the issues that we have with mental illness or as a society, or if they're experiencing, a family member having mental illness experiences, the language can be community building or it can be isolating. And I think, do you have any examples in your personal or professional life where there was a disconnect in language use or some kind of misperception that made you feel more isolated or made you feel more like you had a community?
So in terms of language, the way that I started to become aware of the connection of the language of mental illness and its effect on a relationship between someone who has that experience and someone who doesn't is the mental illness that was in my own family. I had a family member who had some significant depression throughout their adult life, and this is a member of my immediate family, and I used language that I know was hurtful because I didn't understand their circumstances.
Right.
And I didn't understand the way that they were speaking to themselves as a result of this illness. I only began to understand that later on, and had to deal with that regret of causing that negative circumstance.
Mm.
An example personal to me, I had this experience in law school actually.
Mm.
My first semester was a really difficult one. I started primarily on Zoom. I was a 1L in the fall of 2020. So that was a wild time. There were a lot of difficult things happening in the world. And I lost someone who was really close to me to COVID-19 that year. And the isolation that I felt as a result of the hybrid model and primarily being at my apartment was deafening.
Mm.
There were points in time where I sat at my desk and was like, I wonder if anyone remembers I exist. So one of the primary things that bolstered me at a moment that was difficult was when one of the upper class mentors, he was a 3L at the time, and he was part of my SBA mentors, which is social mentors.
Mm-hmm.
He had texted me at one point to check in, see how things were going, and I hadn't responded.
Mm-hmm.
In that place of overwhelm where everything just feels like too much, it's
Right.
often really easy to just, everything gets put aside and nothing gets done. But I hadn't responded to him, and it had been 2 weeks, and I felt like an ass. So I was figuring that this was not going to go anywhere. But he texted me again. And that, in and of itself, that act, that checking back when you hadn't seen someone, was enough to reel me back in. To go, okay, someone does remember that I exist.
Right.
I exist outside of the four walls of my apartment that constantly feel like they're closing in on me. And that small moment of connection was really important in a really tough year for me.
Yeah. And that's so similar, not so similar, I should say, but there are similarities between that instance and the instance that Terry had spoken about in the podcast with the young man. And, you never know what that small act is going to mean to somebody else. And I feel like that's something that we as a society don't really put much emphasis on. It's very personal driven. You're minding your business, you're staying in your lane, you're just looking out for you. And I think that goes to show how important these connections that we are making now and in the future will be to our mental well-being and beyond. Is there anything that Terry said that particularly stood out to you or that you wanted to comment on?
You mentioned the story about the young man in the Golden Gate Bridge and that element of if one person asks if I'm okay. When I heard that story and then heard what Terry did with starting a foundation, Stop Minding Your Own Business, it resonated with me because that's something that I've carried forward into law school. I was really lucky as a 1L to have some great connections with upperclassmen students, and they bullied me throughout the year. So when I, as a 2L and now as a 3L, have come across students that I can clearly see are really stressed. Specifically 1Ls, because that tends to be the most stressed population.
Right.
I'll sit down with them and I'll try to meet them where they are and see what I can do to help. And that is sometimes a super awkward conversation.
Right.
Because sometimes that is totally interjecting myself in a conversation I had no business in. But I was in the library the other day, and these two girls simply just kind of looked stressed, and I knew they had a 1L textbook, so I went over and tried to answer some questions. But one of the things that I try to do often in those circumstances is at the end of those conversations, I'll remind them, hey, I'm sure you don't feel smart enough or whatever to do this, to get through this, but I need you to know that I have faith in you.
Right.
And that I fully believe that you're smart enough and accomplished enough to be here. And the evidence of that is that you made it here.
Right.
Deadman Law accepted you. You're here. You're doing this.
Yeah.
And the response I've gotten from those connections, from that making a nuisance of myself in general, has been really positive.
Right.
And it is a need in students who are super stressed and tearing their hair out. And it's been really beneficial to me as well, because seeing that you can have that impact just with some words of advice or some words of encouragement, it feeds the same place in my heart too.
And I think that just speaks to how important it is to have these mentorship opportunities, to have the ability to reach out, to have individuals like you, like Terry, whose passion is to make sure that people are doing okay, and letting them know, hey, it's going to be hard, but you're going to see it through, right? And it's just that little encouragement, or that, you got this, don't worry, or I was in your shoes as well, that can really resonate with different individuals, right? And it can really make a big impact on their well-being, on their trajectory, those sorts of things.
It's interesting the way that I came to it, because I came to it in such a very different way from Terry.
Right.
My background is in dance, and specifically a lot of ballet, which is a similarly stressful atmosphere in its own right.
Right.
And I have been to a lot of auditions. And one of the things that I started to notice was how insular everyone was at auditions, how in their head, how clearly and visibly stressed they were. So something that I started to do was, there's often a break at a dance audition where we do the first portion and then people can get water or go to the bathroom and whatnot. And at the break, I would choose someone that I had noticed in class. Someone who, the quality of their dancing had stood out to me. And I would go let them know what I liked about what they did. And the reaction there that I got, there were girls who burst into tears because they had wound themselves so tightly with such expectations of themselves that it was something they didn't expect to get a compliment like that. And that made me very sad, but also very determined to keep doing that at auditions in the future.
Yeah, and that's, like you said, a very high-stress environment. You get criticism. You can take in a more personal manner. I mean, dance is quite personal, just like somebody can say performance in school is. And I'm just wondering how that's kind of translated into your law school profession, or how you see yourself as a student at SMU, apart from what the examples that you have already provided.
Well, one of the ways that has carried forward has been in my efforts to get better at trial advocacy, because I would like to be a litigator when I secure a position, whatever that ends up looking like. I want to be in the courtroom, and I have struggled with speaking in the past. So I jumped on the opportunities that opened up to me at law school to practice, to try to do better. But those can get stressful themselves at times. And I was on a mock trial team. That criticism, though it was constructive, concentrated in such, it can be an aggressive way.
Right.
Direct.
What
I'm thinking of is the coach's objections to the argument that you're making in mock trial. I got a lot at one point. A coach was kind of testing me, seeing how I responded to things. But it gets to this point where you're so balled up in stress that you're not functional.
Right.
And at that, I had to leave the room. I looked at the coach and I said, I need 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I walked to the end of the hallway and cried for just like a little bit, and then wiped my tears, and I was like, they don't get to see this.
Yeah.
They are not worth this. And I was able to take a breath and go back in. But taking things personally, that is something I've had to work on. Had to work on building, my armor is what my mom and I used to call it, because I've talked to her about a couple of these things.
Right.
But when I can put my armor on, that's great. But I often have to open that up to connect with others, and that's never something I'm never gonna regret that.
Right. Because if you don't obviously open yourself up to others, then you miss all these opportunities for connection, opportunities for fulfillment, things like that. But sometimes it's necessary to kind of make sure that you are looking out for yourself, and whatever that means, especially in law school, which again is such a high pressure environment, or can be a high pressure environment where things can seem very personal, can seem very destabilizing, let's just say.
Probably the best bit of advice that I got as a 1L was from my 3L legal writing tutor. She looked at me at one point because I was expressing the amount of overwhelm I was going through, and she said, Natalie, in 1L, sometimes what you need to do is just the single next step.
Yeah.
If that means, go get some water.
Right.
If that means write out your to-do list. If that means turn your computer on so you can start working.
Yeah.
What's the next step, the singular step that you need to take. And that has been a way that I have carried myself through a number of stressful circumstances.
Yeah.
I'm thinking finals.
Right.
Yes. So that would be advice I would give to someone who was worried about law school or
feeling overwhelmed.
Yes. What's the next step, and also what's something that you can do for yourself. If you've put in a certain amount of work, or even if you haven't, and you're feeling overwhelmed on any particular day, what's something that makes you smile? What's something that you like to do? Give yourself that, because if you don't work for that balance yourself, then all of this work you're putting in for law school gets lost to a certain extent, because it doesn't sink in. You don't get the lessons, and you're giving a lot to do this work. Right. So you want to make it worth it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point. Like, if you don't pour into yourself, you're not going to have anything to give. And then what are all the late nights, the stress, the anxiety, depression that all can come with law school? What is that in the end if you aren't making sure that you're okay? Terry talked a little bit about imposter syndrome and how sometimes you can have a different perspective on things, and using different tools in your toolkit can help with that. Did you want to touch on imposter syndrome and the connection with mental health?
Sure, absolutely. I absolutely understand imposter syndrome. I recall specifically as a 1L that, oh my God, everybody seemed to know what was happening far better than I did. They seemed to be better read. They seemed to know the cases better. And I felt like I was clueless, as opposed to people who kind of knew what was happening the entire year. The way that I overcame that was to speak it into existence. To name the gremlin in my brain and say, you don't have power over me anymore. And what that means is I found other 1Ls, and a lot of those were venting sessions. Right. Oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, blah blah blah. But just talking it into existence so that your brain gremlins are not tormenting just you. And you then get that power of like, oh, other people are also experiencing this same thing. Oftentimes, when I speak with other law students, what I'll find is a lot of worry about specifically approaching classes, when I talk to 1Ls. And the reframing that I did there was class is always a tool in your toolkit to better understand what you need.
Right.
Class is always about you learning how to learn the law. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, when we become lawyers, you don't need to have an encyclopedic memory of the law.
Right.
We have all of these wonderful tools so that we can use the law to the benefit of our clients. But no one needs you to know the federal rules of evidence such that you could recite them. You simply need to know how to be able to use them. And so what that means is that worrying about how you answer in class is ultimately less than productive. It's worth it to try, but you simply should try to reframe it as the whole process is what the point is.
Right.
This is often phrased as law school teaching you how to think, which is not the best way of describing it, in my opinion, but it's better described as look at class as a way to learn how to utilize the law instead of this focus on your textbook. So those are just a couple of things that I thought of in relation to the imposter syndrome question. I encountered it a lot when I was a mentor for moot court in the spring, and for that, often sharing my story was enough to encourage people, because when I did moot court, ooh boy, we fell on our face so hard. and that in and of itself, I had a judge who was similar to me in being nervous about public speaking. And so she threw me a question as a life raft. And what she told me afterwards was, I clearly could see that you knew the case, that you knew the law based off of your answer to the question. So passing that forward, passing that experience forward has gone a long way to help other people feel comfortable as well.
And is there anything else in the interview or in general that you wanted to touch on?
I think the name of Terry's foundation probably garners some raised eyebrows in some folks. Stop minding your own business, because it goes against the grain of what we're kind of taught.
Right.
But I think that it's really important to internalize that lesson and try to look for those connections in your everyday life, because people want to know that they matter. And that's one of those fundamental things that's at the root of imposter syndrome, that's at the root of issues that come from isolation. Acknowledging people and acknowledging upset that you might see in public and trying to offer whatever comfort you're able to. It's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
If anything is carried forward, I would underline an exclamation point that lesson, because we're all on this wild journey through life together, so we gotta look out for each other.
Yep. And I think it also goes to Terry's point of destigmatizing, like the point that she made about our secrets keeping us sick. I think is just such a powerful thing, because generally in family structures, let's just say, it's best to keep family business within the family, and there are certain things that you don't share outside of the family, like alcohol abuse, drug abuse, mental illness in terms of depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. Those things usually we are taught to keep inside, that it's a secret, that it's not something that you tell other people. And I think that a lot of the work goes to tearing that down and realizing that it's important to talk about these things, because when everything is behind closed doors and very hidden, it's difficult to engage in it. It's difficult to change the attitudes towards it, because they're not really out in the open as much as they would be if everyone felt comfortable expressing themselves, if people felt accepted, if people felt supported. And I think that is something that is so important in the legal field and beyond as well.
I absolutely agree.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for joining me in this recap session. And
thank you for all of the coordinating you did to help get me here.
Sure, of course. And we hope that you look forward to the next episode of this podcast. We'll see you there.